Hi, I'm Gracie, and I'm going to be talking about nomenclature. It will be helpful to reference your periodic table during this video, so I recommend grabbing that. So here are the basic periodic table trends that you need to know to understand nomenclature. First off, the periodic table is divided into metals and nonmetals. Metals are found mostly on the left side of the periodic table, and nonmetals on the right side. Most periodic tables have a dark zigzag line indicating the border of metals and nonmetals, and those elements lining the zigzag are called metalloids. In the middle, you have the transition metals, starting in column 3 and ending in column 12. Then, we have the major charges. The first column, with hydrogen, lithium, sodium, etc., is positive 1, and the second column, with beryllium, magnesium, calcium, etc., is positive 2. On the other side of the table, starting from the left of helium, the column with fluorine, chlorine, and bromine is negative 1, the next column is negative 2, and the next column is negative 3. Memorize these rules because they are needed for nomenclature problems. There are 3 distinct types of nomenclature that you need to be familiar with. Let's start with ionic compounds. An ionic compound is the combination of a metal and a nonmetal. The trick to these problems is to balance out the charges, so you'll need to be familiar with what elements have certain charges. Additionally, you'll need to memorize the polyatomic ions and their charges. I did not attach a list of these ions, since the list that you need to memorize varies slightly depending on which chemistry class you're in. So ask your professor if you're unsure of what polyatomic ions you need to know. Okay, so let me show you what one of these looks like. So I'm going to do magnesium and chlorine. Here's the elements on the periodic table for reference. The charge of magnesium is positive 2, and the charge of chlorine is negative 1. Like I mentioned before, we need to get the overall charge to 0. So what you do is cross the charges and drop them as the subscripts. Since the charge of magnesium is double of chlorine, you need 2 chlorines per every magnesium. So now, here's how to name MgCl2. It's quite simple to name ionic compounds. All you need to do is change the ending of the second element to IDE. There is one exception to this. The ending of polyatomic ions stays the same. Do not ever change their endings to IDE. So the name is just magnesium chloride. Now for ionic compounds with a transition metal. The chemical formulas are the same, but the naming is different. Since most of the transition metals don't have a set charge, they counter the charge of the other element, and that has to be indicated with Roman numerals. Let me show you how this works with iron and oxygen. From the periodic table, you can find that oxygen has a charge of -2, and we don't know the charge of iron since it can vary. Iron takes on the charge of oxygen as +2 to cancel out the -2. So now you can indicate that in the name by putting the Roman numerals for 2 after iron. Then you just change oxygen's ending to add the IDE. Now for molecular compounds. These consist of 2 nonmetals. You'll need to memorize these prefixes to write the names of molecular compounds. Mono isn't used in the name of the first element in the compound. For example, in NO2, you would just leave it as nitrogen. But that's the only exception you need to know. So here's an example compound that can be named based on those prefixes. All you have to do is add the respective prefixes in front of the names of the elements. And don't forget to add IDE to the name of the last element. Now it's time to test your skills. Pause the video and try these out. Pay attention to whether the compound is ionic, includes a transition metal, or is molecular, as you will need to be able to identify that on your own. For the first one, the answer is calcium nitrate. Remember that nitrate is one of the polyatomic ions that you need to know. You do not change the ending to IDE for polyatomic ions. This one includes zinc, which is a transition metal. Since the charge of sulfur is -2, zinc will take on a +2 charge and will need the number 2 Roman numeral after its name. Now this is an example of a molecular compound. All you needed to do was add tri to chlorine and change the ending to IDE. Since this is an example of an ionic compound, you need to cross the charges for the subscripts. Since calcium has a +2 charge and nitrogen a -3 charge, those subscripts will be those numbers but flipped. Now the last one. To write the chemical compound with a transition metal, you just write the elements as they are. There's only one lead and one oxygen, so there will only be one of each in the formula. Woo! That was a ton of information, but that's all for now. I hope this video helped you understand nomenclature better. If you want more practice, feel free to book a tutoring appointment with me or one of the other tutors. Bye!